The Prime Minister has defended his actions following fierce accusations that he was involved in a cover-up related to the Southport attack. While admitting he was aware of certain details about the tragedy, his statement comes after he previously acknowledged that the British state had failed the 3 young girls who were tragically murdered by Axel Rudakubana at a Taylor Swift dance class last summer. Starmer emphasized that Southport must be a line in the sand, vowing that nothing would be off the table in the upcoming inquiry, which he claims will drive real change. He attempted to justify his decision by suggesting that revealing Rudakubana's ties to terrorism might have derailed the investigation. At the same time, Starmer placed blame on the far right for much of the unrest. In today's video, we'll react to the media's tough questions as they grill him on these controversial statements. But first, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let's take a look.
The senseless, barbaric murder of 3 young girls in Southport is a devastating moment in our history. No words come anywhere close to expressing the brutality and horror in this case. Every parent in Britain will have had the same thought. It could have been anywhere. It could have been our children. But it was Southport. It was Bibi, 6 years old. Elsie, 7. Alice, 9. Back in August, I said there would be a time for questions, but that first, justice had to be done.
Thank you. Prime Minister, it now emerges the perpetrator was known to the authorities and had been referred to prevent the anti-terrorism programme 3 times. He'd had contact with the police, the courts, the justice, the youth system and mental health services. It's a catastrophic failure of the state to protect those young girls. Do you acknowledge that if that information had come out when the riots were happening, it would have provoked further outrage by the public, so you withheld information? Is that true? And do you acknowledge that whatever happens now, whatever public inquiry you carry out, this will hugely undermine trust from the public in the authorities and your government? Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Let me be clear. Responsibility for the disorder and the violence lies with those that perpetrated it. We need to be really clear about that. But let me address the facts as you put them to me. There has been a failure here, and I don't intend to let any institution of the state deflect from their failures, and I acknowledge that readily here. Yes, I knew the details as they were emerging. That is the usual practice in a case such as this. But you know and I know that it would not have been right to disclose those details. The only losers, if the details had been disclosed, would be the victims and the families, because it ran the risk the trial would collapse. I'm never going to do that. Never going to do that, because they deserve that justice. And only by having the rules in place can that justice be delivered, as a measure of it now has. And I wouldn't be forgiven if I had. Those are not just my choices, though it is a choice I would make. It is also the law of the land. That is why I couldn't disclose the details. It's why others couldn't disclose the details. It's why all of you as journalists couldn't disclose the details, because the same laws applied to you just as they applied to me. And it's really important that we make that clear. But the purpose of the rule is to protect the justice that the families and the victims are entitled to. I think that's the right thing. It is now right, having got to this stage, that the questions are asked and the answers are given, which is why we've taken the course of an inquiry, but also why between now and the conclusion of the inquiry, we will happily answer any questions that are put to us. But that is why, notwithstanding that, yes, I was being kept updated, of course, I did not disclose anything that would collapse the trial and defeat justice in this case. And I don't think anybody could ever have looked the victims and their families in the eye if they'd ever done that. Thank you, Beth. Can I have Paul Brand, please, from ITV?
Paul Brand from ITV. Thank you, Prime Minister. All of us, as you say, as journalists, understand the risk of contempt of court, of prejudicing a trial. But we live in a different age now, don't we, where misinformation and disinformation spreads at lightning speed online. I was in Southport on the day of the attacks. There was a short window in which information could have been released before charge, before any risk of prejudicing a trial. Why didn't you do that? And do you think it was a mistake not to provide that detail then?
Firstly, let me address part of your... Look, it is true that we live in a different age in that information is now available online as well as offline. And I understand the frustration of all, but including some journalists who observe the rules and don't report what they know because they know that the law doesn't permit it and it runs the risk of collapsing a trial, only to see information online that doesn't appear to be following the same rules. And that is not acceptable. That has to be addressed, and it'll be part of what we will be looking at, because that can't be right. But in relation to the central thrust of your question, the importance of the rule about not disclosing this information is to ensure that the trial can take place and that where an individual is guilty, they're held to account, as has now happened in this case. And that is why the law carefully restricts what can be said by anyone, not just me as Prime Minister, but anybody in these circumstances. And it is done to protect the family and their victims. That is the right thing, and that is what the law requires. It's also the choice I would make to ensure that my first thoughts are about justice for the victims and their families. That, for me, is first and foremost. Well, yesterday, thankfully, a measure of justice was done, but it won't bring those girls back to their families, and it won't remove the trauma from the lives of those who were injured. Their lives will never be the same. So before I turn to the questions that must now be answered, for the families and the nation, I first want to recognise their unimaginable grief, because I know the whole country grieves for them. The tragedy of the Southport killings must be a line in the sand for Britain. We must make sure the names of those 3 young girls are not associated with the vile perpetrator, but instead with a fundamental change in how Britain protects its citizens and its children. In pursuit of that, we must, of course, ask and answer difficult questions. Questions that should be far-reaching, unburdened by cultural or institutional sensitivities, and driven only by the pursuit of justice. That is what we owe the families.
What's your thought on this? Let us know in the comments below. Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, has accused Prime Minister Keir Starmer of misleading the public regarding the Southport killer, Axel Rudakubana, and the protests that followed. Tice argued that Starmer's statements misrepresented the truth, diminishing public concerns and evading accountability. This accusation is part of a larger political debate surrounding issues like crime, immigration, and public safety, with Reform UK calling for more transparency in how the government handles such critical matters. What do you think of Starmer's response and Tice's criticism?